Good morning and welcome to today's show. I'm Jeff Rehmeyer. I'm an attorney and the president at the CGA Law Firm. Historically, my practice involved estate planning and administration, business, real estate, municipal. Now I'm emphasizing a focus on estate planning to include planning for young adults. Today, we're going to talk about protecting your family. Specifically, we're going to be talking about funeral planning and how important it is to discuss one's funeral desires before death so your family members know what to do. On today's show, we have Kim Butcher. Welcome, Kim.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning.
So Kim watched one of my earlier broadcasts, and we've had a relationship for a few years, although I know Kim primarily as the mayor of New Freedom Borough. And I know in that role, he works tirelessly and deals with a lot of challenging situations. And I've come to know that, Kim, you were a funeral director previously.
I was a funeral director for about 20 years, late in life.
Well, tell us how that happened. How did you get there, and why did you decide to become a funeral director, Kim?
Well, I grew up in New Freedom, and my grandparents lived across the street from the local funeral home. The gentleman that owned it and ran it, his family, they're a five-generation family in the funeral business. And I used to go play there when I was a kid. We'd go over to my grandparents on Sunday, and I'd go over and bug him in the funeral home. And when I decided to go to college, or my parents decided I was going to college, I went over to Mr. Hartenstein, Jake Hartenstein, and I said, Jake, I'd like to be a funeral director. What do I have to do? And he said, you have to go to college, and you're not going to get a job in the funeral business, because at that time, most funeral homes were family owned and operated. They may have had one full time, but mom did the books and was in the office. Dad did the arrangements, and maybe somebody else did the technical work. So at that time, they might have done 25, 30 funerals a year. So as I was a little disheartened, he said, go get an education, go to college, see what happens. And I did. I went to college. I majored in music at York College of Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
Originally wanted to be a teacher. Decided, teachers made less money than most of my other friends were making out in the world in retail. So I went into retail for a while and had an opportunity to purchase a restaurant in New York. I did that for about 6 years and sold that. After that, I became a beer salesman. So I always say I went from getting people bombed to embalmed, and but I became an owner in that company, sold it, and did some consulting work. My father-in-law was a Baltimore County fireman. Of course, they don't get Social Security. They just get their retirement. He needed a couple more quarters to get Social Security. So what I did was, he had a retinal problem. He was going to be off for about 6 weeks. I said, how about if I fill in for you? At that time, Jake's son, Jim, had taken over the business. And I went in. I was parking cars, doing the menial tasks, but some of the important tasks. And I decided, I still want to do this. So I went to Jim Hartenstein and I said, Jim, if I go back to school, get my funeral director's license, would you consider hiring me? He said, not only would I hire you, I'll pay for the education. So after 4 years of college, I went back to Catonsville under their mortuary science program. And 2 years later, and a year of apprenticeship in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is pretty tough when it comes to education for funeral directors, and they're not all reciprocal. They're not all the same. But Pennsylvania, you're talking about a 5-year education, believe it or not. Some people just think, you take some online classes, you read about it, you're a funeral director. It's very involved in the coursework. So I became a funeral director, and I just liked working with people at their when they were the most vulnerable and they're the most really emotional that that a person could be at a very devastating time in their lives. And I had friends that asked me, why in the world did you become a funeral director? And my stock answer then and now is because I can.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for everybody, but it was something that it sounds funny to say that I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I felt that it chose me. I didn't choose it, basically.
Mm-hmm. So just so I know, because I'm curious now, what was the name of the restaurant?
It was North York Bar and Grill out in right on the corner of Route 30 and 83.
Okay. And what's your favorite beer?
It had to be Coors. When I was in the beer business, that was it. I was in an ID distributor. So anybody in 4 counties that bought Coors when Coors came into the state of Pennsylvania had to purchase it through our company.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what would a typical day be like for you as a funeral director, just so people understand what that involves?
Boy, I don't know if there is a typical day when it comes to funeral directing. The day started at 8 o'clock on the clock, but we might show up at the office and not have a lot to do one day. We had 2 funeral homes, one in Stewartstown, and the other one was in New Freedom.
Mm-hmm.
We did about 300 to 350 funerals a year. But our staff, I mean, you might go a couple of days and nothing, and you might go home and get a call at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 2 in the morning. We were on call 24/7, 365.
Mm.
And when we got the call, we had to go. Our funeral directors also did the removal. We wanted to keep things consistent for families,
Mm-hmm.
so that they were dealing with one person, not shuffling them between 3 and 4 people. You form a relationship, and some of those relationships I still have today. One of my fondest memories really was my mother was in the hospital after having a double aneurysm, and sitting in the ICU with her. And I had friends in New Freedom that uh, they knew that their parent was on the last hours, and they couldn't be there, but yet they didn't want him to be alone. So mom was in the bed next to him, and I said, look, you guys go home, get some rest. I'll sit with him. I sat with him, held his hand, and until he took his last breath. And not everybody can do that, but I felt that I was helping that family and putting them at ease, knowing that that person, their loved one, wasn't alone when they took their last breath. So it's, as I say, some people can do this and some people can't. But we may get a call to go to a hospital, go to a home. Of course, there are so many various um, ways that somebody may die. It could be suicide. It could be 100-year-old grandma that the family really isn't all that upset. They're glad that she's not suffering anymore with diseases and things like that. My father died at 60 of cancer, and we just prayed that it was time,
Mm-hmm.
that he didn't have to suffer anymore, but to be with that family and give them some reassurance, and some empathy, at a time that they really need it, and direct them through this process. And it really is a process for families that they need to go through in the beginning of their grief journey. So it was always important that the first impression that you have with that family is a good impression, that you're going to take care of, you respect the family and that person, and you're going to take the best care of them that you possibly can.
Okay, so I was going to ask you to walk through the functions of a funeral director, but I'm going to change that question.
Sure.
You talked about a process. So can you highlight the steps in the process that you assisted with when you were a funeral director? So somebody is close to death, you refer to somebody who you stay with them until they die, but they die. What then happens? What are those steps that the funeral director helps the family go through to complete that process?
Well, the family needs to be in touch with the funeral home. I always suggest, if you know something is imminent, contact your local funeral home. If you know exactly who you're going to use, contact them, give them a little bit of a heads up where that person is. We may get some information at that time, especially name, what the situation is. And when we get that call that that person is deceased, we would sometimes have to contact the doctor, make sure that a death certificate is going to be signed, either at the hospital, or sometimes it may be a coroner's case. We may have to contact the coroner and make sure that the coroner is going to sign a death certificate, because nothing can be done really until you have that certificate. Um, and at that point, the funeral home, maybe myself, one of the other directors, wherever that person is, we're going to go, we're going to respectfully bring them back to the funeral home. And hopefully the family has decided on the method of disposition. And when I say that, I mean, are they looking at cremation? Are they looking at embalming with a viewing? A lot of times people think somebody has to be embalmed. They don't. The state of Pennsylvania gives leeway of 24 to 36 hours where a family can be with their loved one without embalming, and then maybe have a closed casket, maybe have immediate burial, or decide that they want to do cremation following. It's always important for the family to be able to have time to say their final goodbyes, no matter what the circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lady, I still see her. Her husband, unfortunately, was tearing down a barn in Maryland, and we dealt with folks in Maryland. Being in New Freedom, we're very close to the Maryland line. And unfortunately, while he was tearing down the barn, it fell on him and he was crushed drastically.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she just had to see him, spend some time with him. So I personally made sure that he was covered. We use a table, a quilt, and basically the only thing she had was his hand with his wedding ring that she could sit there and hold for 15 or 20 minutes, and gave her the opportunity to say goodbye to her husband. I would see her out at the market, out in town, around, and whenever I did, she'd come up to me, give me a big hug, and say, you don't know how much I appreciated what you did for me, letting me have the opportunity to say goodbye one last time. And that was always important, no matter what the circumstance was. People need closure.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about anything in life, I think we need closure. When it comes to retirement, you want some closure before you retire, so that it's that time.
Hmm.
But the memorialization of that person and dealing with the family too is so very important. But one of the reasons I wanted to come on your show was to let people know you don't have to wait until the last minute um, to do all of these things. I've never had a family come to me and say, gee, I wish mom and dad or I wish grandma wouldn't have prearranged her funeral. They're always so grateful because it made it so much easier for them. Even today, years ago, we didn't talk about death. Nobody wanted to sit around the kitchen table and talk about, I'm going to die someday, and this is what I would like. These are my wishes. They just, it was kind of taboo. But I recommend that people take the opportunity, bring your family together, let them know what your wishes and desires are, because there's nothing worse than, excuse me, there's nothing worse than a family sitting in making arrangements, looking at each other and saying, well, I thought dad told you what he wanted. Well, I thought dad told you what he wanted. And nobody knows what that person's real desire was. Was it cremation? Did they want a viewing? Did they want certain songs? I like the fact that when you do prearrangements, you can do as little or as much as you want. I recommend that people write down a biological history, or a work history. Where did you work? Because that's tough when emotions are running high. Oh God, I know Dad worked at hemp, but when? How long did he work there? What years? When was he in the service? Where did he serve? Write those things down for your family. Tell them where it is, even if they don't want to get together and really have that serious talk, which I do recommend. At least give your family the opportunity to have that information, which is really going to be necessary. We have to go through, it's probably a 2 to 3 hour process when we're doing an arrangement conference with a family.
Hmm.
And of course, that's at the worst time. Mentally, they're not thinking straight. They may have been up for days, depending on the circumstance. It may have been sudden. It may have been, a child, an infant, but most times older folks, please take that opportunity to have a conversation. I've been listening to some of your family matters topics, and I know you plan for retirement. We set up trusts with our attorneys. We do life insurance to take care of our loved ones. Designate healthcare directives, medical power of attorney. um, I think it's important for an attorney to discuss with their clients, and what do you want to happen after you die? It's a hard subject. Nobody likes to say the word die, but as the old saying goes, two things we can depend on are death and taxes,
Hmm.
and it's important to me that an attorney be able to take that time and explain. People have a DNR. They have power of attorney. They assign a power of attorney, based on their attorney's recommendation. Um, a lot of people don't realize power of attorney ceases upon death. And you'd be surprised. People don't know that. Why have power of attorney? No, you don't have power of attorney. And basically, once a person is deceased, it's goes to next of kin.
Hmm.
And next of kin might not always be the one you want to make your funeral arrangements. I've seen knockdown dragouts during an arrangement conference. Yeah, and some hair pulling and, down and dirty. And I get up, get down to the basement, say, when you get this straightened out, come call me. And that's unfortunate. And as I said, emotions are running high. It's much more easy on a family to be able to walk in and have a funeral director say, hey, I talked to your mom and dad a year ago, and here's the information they gave me. Here's what they said they would like. No frills, but one thing I learned, the first thing I learned when I went to mortuary school is that funerals are for the living. So let your family help you decide what they need and what they want in order to say goodbye. Another thing is a memory picture. That last memory picture that you have before that casket closes is so important. So make sure you're dealing with a funeral home that has been in business, that you've dealt with, that you've seen their work, the technical aspects of a funeral director, which I typically don't go into, the behind the scenes work. That is important. I've seen some good embalmers and I've seen some bad embalmers, and we all go to funerals and we look at somebody, boy, that doesn't look like Martha, and there are other ones that, gee whiz, I thought she was going to sit up and wave. And those are important things to recognize and to know about a funeral home. Today, as we are in corporate America, you may have a corporation, there are several that may own hundreds of funeral homes. Are they in a business, or are they in the business of helping you to decide how they can help you? Maryland, for example, I give Maryland a lot, because to be a funeral director in Maryland, you only need a certificate, 2 years of mortuary school. You train while you're in mortuary school for 1,000 hours, I think it is, a half a year, 6 months, and you get a license. I remember asking somebody, well, gee, how long, does it take you? What's working for this corporate funeral home? Tell me about it. And they said, well, we get 45 minutes to dress, casket, and cosmetize a person. Well, you know what? It would take me longer than 45 minutes just to do somebody's hands cosmetically. It's so important, that last picture you have of your loved one. So, we all go to funerals, how their ethics are and what their work ethics is. And that's important. It's very important.
That was an outstanding answer. So I'm going to unpack a little bit of what you said, and I appreciated all of it. One, you did reference some key documents, the last will and testament that typically dictates what happens after you die. 2 key documents that are in place and effective before you die, the power of attorney that deals with financial matters, and that healthcare power of attorney, which is for medical, which typically includes a living will that has that directive if you're in an end-stage medical condition. So those are the big 3. Interestingly, Kim, part of why I've been doing different approaches to providing education, including this Family Matters show, is I've found a few other instances where people need assistance. One that really isn't for today is doing documents for a child that turns 18 because they're legally adult. Another document that I've since implemented with my estate planning is I do a final instruction letter. And that's the letter that I use, Kim, to prompt individuals to gather key information like what funeral home do they want to use? Did they talk to somebody and make arrangements?
Absolutely.
Who are the professionals that assisted them? Who is their life insurance agent, their accountant, their attorney? Any people that you want to have involved in the funeral process, any preferences with regard to the process. So you refer to cremation or embalming or open casket or closed or music, burial preferences.
Absolutely.
So that's the document I now offer to people, and I help them complete it if they want me to, or I provide it to them to the complete after our meeting, depending upon their preferences. Because a lot of this really is encouraging people to take the steps, and all that centers on what I think is the key thing that you mentioned early on in that explanation, which was have conversations with your loved ones so they understand what documents are in place, who can help them, what's important to you, and what do they need to deal with. Because the failure to have those conversations, you referred to knockdown dragouts. I think I heard the word hair pulling.
I've seen it.
And I do not doubt it at all. And I've seen families when somebody's very sick, and I've seen families after somebody dies, and it's very easy for chaos to erupt because there's uncertainty about what to do. And to your point about next of kin helping, next of kin may know what to do, they may not know what to do, they may not agree. So if you provide direction yourself, and pre-planning these funeral arrangements is certainly a way to do that, then you get rid of that uncertainty and you create a path forward to allow for grieving and handling things properly.
Absolutely. And nobody is going to come back and say, I wish mom and dad wouldn't have done that. Another thing that I really didn't touch on, and you may know what the legal term for it is, we would have some people that we would recommend. I know a will is not a good example of where to put a document with your final wishes when it comes to funeralization, but we would have people that would present a codicil to their will. And there's also, I think, I can't remember what the term is for the document, but it basically states, after I'm deceased, this is what I want and nobody can change it. Because power of attorney has the right before death. The will takes over after disposition. Disposition can be cremation, it can be burial. In between, that person, the deceased, has no rights. You need to talk to your attorney about how you can have those rights, because the next of kin is the one that's going to come in, and they've got it. It's the oldest, nearest and dearest. It's the oldest, unless you have specified you want a particular person that you've talked to, and it doesn't have to be a family member. But there, I know, are legal documents that we would present to families that if this is what you want, absolutely, this is what you're going to get, and nobody can really change it unless they go to court. And nobody's really I've never seen anybody try to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting, Kim, and I'll have to give some thought to, because you're correct. The power of attorney decisions for you before you're living. The will takes over technically after that funeral, because you need that death certificate.
That's right.
Present with the will to probate, and that puts an executor in place, and then the executor has that power. I would have to give some thought to how to legally bind somebody. My experience has been that you need to be able to rely on your executor or somebody else that you have in that leadership position. And most people do defer to the executor or to the executrix, even if they haven't been appointed, at least insofar as family matters and decisions. And I think to your point on pre-planning, if you pre-plan something, I think that's largely definitive. And if you pre-plan and prepay, I think it's highly unlikely somebody's going to undo what you have in place, where I think the uncertainty exists.
It is unlikely, but I've seen it happen, and some of it has to do with finances. You guys, my mother had a double brain aneurysm. And this may sound cruel, but we had an attorney that we trusted. My parents knew them since they were young. They worked together. It was a different law firm, but I think the name Rehmeyer. Ray was a good, close friend of my parents. Mom was in the hospital, and the first call I made was to Ray. Ray, what do I do? And he guided me through, what if she doesn't make it? But what if she does make it? And he gave up, because I had power of attorney. He said, here's what I want you to do. Tomorrow, I want you to go to the bank and I want you to start gifting you and your sister. He said, it might work out, it might not. If she survives, that's fine, but we're protecting her assets. Fortunately, she lived for another 15 years and we were able to put away, through gifting to my sister and I, a lot of money that would have gone to a nursing home. I had a family that the attorney said, here's what I want you to do. Gift each of your kids $100,000. She had it. Put it in your name only. Don't touch it. Act like it's not there. 2 of the family members did that. The one used it for a down payment on their house. Okay. Mom was healthy. She had a stroke. She ended up in the funeral home, or in the nursing home for several years. Well, Medicare came back on them and said, well, you're allowed to gift this much a year. You over gifted out of that 100,000. You now owe us $80,000, and we'd like to have our money this week. Maybe not this week, but we'd like to have our money back. The other two of the children, yep, we had it here. We were going to use it for mom if she needed it, and they had it to pay back. The ones that took the money and used it for down payment on the house, guess what? They didn't have a house anymore because they had to sell it to pay back the Medicare portion that was due. So that's why I say it's always wise, why hire an attorney if you're not going to listen to them? And basically, it saved my sister and I, hundreds of thousands of dollars by gifting and her living past that. Had she not done that, we probably would have had to pay it back. That's what it was there for. We all want our kids to have it a little better than we do. And whether we do that with insurance or whether we start gifting at an older age, it's important to us that we leave something for family.
Interesting. Well, I do certainly agree with the idea that you suggested, which is you need to be active about your thoughts and your plans. One of the big premises with my work in this field is really planning ahead and having those discussions, because if you plan ahead, you can do something today about something that's going to happen tomorrow. And it sounds like that happened in your case, and it happened in a few other cases. So I certainly agree with that. You need to get the right advice and get guidance so you can do what you want to do it efficiently, and do it protectively. So once again, we agree, Kim. One other question I did want to ask you today before we start to conclude is, if you could give anybody one piece of practical advice about how they might want to be remembered, what sort of advice would that be? Kind of the pre-planned advice, if there's a tip or something for somebody to keep in mind in that regard.
Stay close to someone in your family. Hopefully it's your children. Have that discussion. After Sunday dinner at the house, say, look, let's sit down and I want to tell you, what my thoughts are. And I'm really dead set that this is the way it's going to be. But as I said, funerals are for the living, not the deceased. But there can be a compromise there among family members. Hopefully there's a good enough relationship that you can have that compromise. Well, Mom, I really would like to do this, or, do as much for your family as you can, because at that particular time, it's going to be so difficult for them to make those decisions. My wife knows exactly what I want. Whether she does it or not, that's a different story. And to me, it really doesn't matter. my preference is cremation, but she likes the idea of being able to have a final goodbye, and so do my children. So what they know my wishes, they know my favorite songs, they know my background. I would advise people have everything that is important: life insurance, any important papers, your will. Don't stick it in a bank somewhere in a safety deposit box, or at
Mhm.
least have several copies of that your family can get a hold of. And if the one thing I would say is, if you're going to present a codicil to your will of your wishes upon death, make sure that it's available to them. Talk to your kids. This is where these important papers are in the house. This is the drawer I keep them. When my father-in-law passed away, we knew exactly where everything was. Every insurance policy, everything that had to do with taking care of his wife, and making it as easy as it possibly could, because the one thing we know, it's going to happen to all of us,
Mhm.
and we don't want our families to have to suffer any undue burden that that isn't necessary. We love our kids, we love our families. uh, it's the ultimate gift that you can give them. It's the last gift you can give them, in realizing that they're upholding your final wishes in coordination with what they want. You know
Excellent. Well, Kim, I knew that you would be an outstanding
that
speaker.
to me would sum it up. I'm sorry.
Nope, go ahead, finish up.
No, I didn't hear what you said. I just feel that it's always been a taboo subject. Don't make it taboo. Don't make it taboo. You love your family. Make things during that time as easy as you can. And I'll guess I'll finalize with something I said before. No family has ever come to me and said, "I wish mom and dad wouldn't have pre-planned their funeral." Pre-plan, and you can do that without prepaying. Go to a funeral home and say, "Look, this is what I'd like to start pre-planning. Don't necessarily want to pay for it. I don't care what casket the kids pick out. Just let them know it doesn't have to be something expensive. Get the process started. You don't have to do the whole thing."
Mhm. Well, Kim, I appreciate all your insight. I knew that you would be an outstanding speaker for this based on my experience with you in the municipal arena. And I think you've shared a lot of great information. One of my takeaways I'm hearing again is that communication with your family, planning ahead. And what I think that really does is it saves your family from added pain, added agony, added uncertainty at one of the hardest times that anybody ever experiences, which is when a loved one dies.
Absolutely. That is a fantastic summary.
All right. Thank you so much, Kim. I appreciate all that you do. I appreciate our relationship very much. And you have a terrific day.
I will, and I'll see you later this week.
Yes, you will.
All right, Jeffrey. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Goodbye.